Berserk is a tale about a man fighting against his destiny, a tale of untold struggle, sacrifice, and torment, a tale that evokes so much emotion and tumult that at times, it feels like a religious experience. It's a tale about a man defying all the odds and going completely berserk in the process. In fact, my favorite moment of the manga itself is when Guts goes up against the God Hand and says, "It's Birkin time." Bruh. But lost amongst the enthralling story and the beautiful artwork is the origins of the story itself, Berserk, coming from the Old Norse Berserker. Now, it is said that the Berserker warriors were to have fought in a trance-like fury, committing unspeakable atrocities in a fit of violent rage. In fact, the word Berserker literally means bear shirt, as warriors of this kind would wear nothing more than a bear pelt into battle, and they would foam at the mouth and gnaw on the rims of their shields. Now, we've seen a similar motif played out in Berserk, especially when Guts gnawed on Griffith's sword in their first battle. In fact, this is a very common theme with Guts, where he utilizes his teeth in very offensive and creative ways. Now, to go quote-unquote berserk was to hamask, which translates to change form. In this case, they would enter a state of wild fury. Now, some scholars have interpreted that those who could transform into a berserker as Hamrammer or Shapestrong, literally able to shapeshift into a bear's form. Now, as a berserker, they typically congregated into one of three animal cults: the cult of the bear, the wild boar, or the wolf. The last one is of particular interest, especially from the perspective of Kentaro Miura's manga, because Guts' internal beast of darkness is that of a wolf-like creature. Unsurprisingly, wolf warriors were said to wear the pelt of a wolf over their chainmail, and they were known as Odin's special warriors, and according to one legend, Odin's men went without their mail coats and were mad as hounds or wolves. They bit their shields and they slew men, but neither fire nor iron had effect upon them. This is called going berserk. This coincides well with Guts' overall demeanor, especially during the Black Swordsman arc, and demonstrates how Kentaro Miura was an astute admirer of Norse mythology. But the connections go much deeper than this. Wolves, as you might have guessed, are especially important in Norse mythology, but none are more important than Loki's own child, that being the monstrous wolf Fenrir. Now, Fenrir was the embodiment of destructive force and chaos. His horror was so immense that even Odin himself feared him. And Odin was the supreme Norse god. So imagine the supreme god of any religion being afraid of a wolf. I mean, that wolf must be strong as absolute hell itself. And it was even prophesized that Fenrir was supposed to kill Odin at Ragnarok. Now, Fenrir was known for two defining characteristics: his immense size and his indomitable strength. Because of this, various Norse gods attempted to bind him with chains. However, no chain was strong enough to hold Fenrir's immeasurable strength. Out of desperation, the Norse gods then commissioned dwarves to forge a chain that was impossible to break, known as Gleipnir. Now, as a brief aside, every time they put these chains on Fenrir, they always told him that they were testing his strength. You know, they were kind of tricking him. But each time, he managed to break the chains. However, Fenrir determined that Gleipnir was a bit different. So he made a deal with the gods. He said he would only be bound by Gleipnir if one of the gods placed his hand in his mouth. Now, one of the gods was brave enough to do so, and he was Tyr, the Norse god of war and bloodshed. And upon doing so, Fenrir bit his arm clean off. Now, after hearing all this information about Fenrir, I'm sure you see a couple of associations with him and some of the Berserk characters, specifically with Guts and the Beast of Darkness. Now, for one, Guts' Beast of Darkness is bound with chains to contain his indomitable strength. Yet due to the Beast of Darkness' growing size and strength, the chains were eventually broken. In fact, we saw this in the most recent chapters of Berserk. Number 2, in Fenrir's tale, Tyr lost his arm to the wolf. Now, Kentaro Miura sort of mirrored this by having Guts lose his arm to Borkov the Apostle. So as you can see, these myths are not exact templates that Kentaro Miura took and put into his manga. He took various components of the myth itself and implemented it in different ways. He used it more so for inspiration rather as a blueprint. Now, according to the Torslanda plates, which are 4 bronze plates depicting Germanic mythology, we find that Odin is missing his right eye. As I pointed out earlier, Odin is a prominent god in Norse mythology. He is a god of death, which is what Guts' life has been about since the very beginnings of his accursed birth. And when you consider that Odin met his fate at the jaws of Fenrir, it could signal that Guts may eventually be overtaken by his own beast of darkness if he's not careful. And 4, I stated that the Norse gods commissioned dwarfs to forge Gleipnir, which was a device to contain Fenrir's immeasurable power. Now this could be likened to the Berserker armor forged by Hanar, who happens to be a dwarf. And you'll even notice that when Hanar elicited the blood vision in Guts, he used chains to bind Guts to make sure that he wouldn't rage out. So he knew of the dangers of the armor itself. He knew of the potential, he knew of the anger and the power. And he used a set of chains, much like the Norse god used chains, to try to bind Fenrir. So you can see a lot of parallels between Fenrir, the Beast of Darkness, and Guts. But the parallels don't end there. In the ending of Norse mythology, it foretells of a series of impending events. Such events include a great battle in which numerous gods will meet their doom, precipitating natural disasters and a burning of the world. The event is known as Ragnarok. And the Berserk universe also seems to be leading to some apocalyptic-like event, in which the members of the God Hand could also meet their doom. Now, one of the interesting bits of information about Ragnarok is that it's completely unavoidable. Odin, for example, is destined to meet his doom at Ragnarok by being swallowed by Fenrir. And no matter how hard he fought against the currents, no matter how hard he tried to avoid his own destiny, he couldn't do it. It just wasn't possible, which is very similar to the concept of causality in Berserk. Even though humans are led to believe that their choices matter, that they have autonomy in their life, in the end, in the Berserk universe, causality dictates their chosen path. And perhaps like Fenrir, Guts will also defeat the prominent God Hand member himself, the man he seeks retribution against, Griffith. Now, I already linked Guts to Odin in terms of them both losing their eyes. Now, I'm assuming that if you're on my channel, you probably have already read Berserk and know why Guts lost his eye. But you may not know why Odin lost his. Well, it turns out that in Norse mythology, Odin gave up his eye for cosmic knowledge. So essentially, he sacrificed a part of himself for a transcendental power. Now, that seems awfully similar to something we've seen in Berserk. In fact, Griffith sacrificed his soul and his comrades' souls for his God Hand form. And as a result of this decision, Guts lost his right eye. The same eye that Odin lost when he made his sacrifice. Again, Mira is inspired by many different mythological tales. But like I said earlier, he doesn't just take those tales and imprint them onto the manga itself. No, he takes inspiration and sort of puts his own twist on it. So it's very possible that Odin serves as inspiration for both Guts and Griffith. And with that said, I could see the ending playing out in one of two ways. Now, if we take the assumption that Guts is Odin and the Beast of Darkness is Fenrir, then Fenrir consumes Odin, which means that the Beast of Darkness would consume Guts, due to Guts losing control over him, which is a very real possibility, especially given the events of the last couple of chapters in which the Beast of Darkness has broken his chains and become free of Guts' influence. Now, in the second scenario, Griffith could be Odin, due to the fact that he made a huge sacrifice for power. And in this scenario, he will be destroyed by Guts in the final cataclysmic events resembling Ragnarok. Now, Odin was thought to be the quote-unquote leader of souls. And in chapter 335 of Berserk, Griffith was shown to manipulate the souls of the departed. Odin also had the ability to shapeshift into an animal or a human. Griffith, likewise, can shapeshift into a bird in people's dreams, and can turn himself into Femto in the astral realm. There's also a very fascinating quote about Odin that I want to give you as well. Odin can also just say a single word, and he will be blowing out the flames of fire, or tone down the waves of the sea. Odin is seldom active in battle, but when he is, he can make his enemies blind in combat, deaf, or horror-struck. Odin can make their weapons hit like sticks, or make his own men strong as a bear, or go berserk. Now, Griffith is a brilliant tactician that can strike fear in his adversaries with his mere presence. In fact, Ganishka was completely overwhelmed by Griffith's mere presence. When Griffith stared down Foss in the early chapters, the short minister was overwhelmed with fear and anxiety. And the fact that Guts couldn't even hit Griffith with his sword in the most recent chapters lends credence to the idea that Griffith is much like Odin. He can make his opponents seem very weak and ineffectual. Now, Odin also had a horse named Sleipnir, and Sleipnir is associated with the wind and has the marks of hell upon him. Griffith likewise is associated with the wind and resides in hell as Femto. Now, given the multitude of connections, you may be wondering to yourself, are there any other characters in Berserk that are connected to Norse mythology? And in a word, yes. Now, try to hear me out on this one, because I believe a lot of people will think I'm kind of ridiculous for saying this, but that's mostly due to Marvel movies and the distortion of some mythology. Now, Loki, the cunning trickster who can change shape and sex, is actually quite similar to Skull Knight. Again, this is not the Loki that we're talking about. This is the Loki we're talking about. I mentioned before that Loki was the father of Fenrir. And with Guts and the Beast of Darkness being one and the same, we could sort of think of Skull Knight as Guts' pseudo-father. I mean, Skull Knight has given Guts sagely advice time and time again, and has saved his life on more than one occasion. Furthermore, Loki turns out to be the trigger for Ragnarok. And in that event, he leads Fenrir, Jormungand, and Hel, the goddess of the dead, to battle against the gods. And I could definitely see a similar event playing out in which Skull Knight leads Guts and the Beast of Darkness against the various members of the God Hand in the final battle at Falconia. One could also say that Skull Knight has already triggered the events of quote-unquote Ragnarok. By attempting to cut Femto in chapter 304, Skull Knight brought causality to a head. Or as Femto said, causality is brought to fruition with this sword stroke. One twice reincarnated, and a sword stroke which reaches still deeper into the spirit world, have opened the door. Now, this event brought about Fantasia. And Fantasia is the overlapping of the astral and physical realms. It allows dragons, trolls, and giants to exist within the physical realm. And Ragnarok is an event where all types of mythological creatures and gods fight in a cataclysmic battle. So the stage has been set by Skull Knight himself, much like the stage was set by Loki for Ragnarok. And speaking about the Age of Fantasia, we have to talk about the World Spiral Tree. Now, this tree is strikingly similar to the Tree of Yggdrasil, the Norse Tree of Life. It is an enormous ash tree that connects the 9 worlds, including the Underworld, Niflheim, the Earth, Midgard, and the Realm of the Gods, Asgard. And it is presumed that the World Spiral Tree in Berserk connects the astral, physical, and godly realms. And it is said that the Tree of Yggdrasil will serve as a source of new life after the events of Ragnarok. And I wouldn't be surprised if the same were to be true for the World Spiral Tree in Berserk. It is very possible that after all the cataclysmic events that take place and the destruction of many gods and mythological creatures, that something new will be born out of it. What or who that will be? We'll just have to wait and see how that unfolds. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about that connects Berserk to Norse mythology is the runic alphabet, an alphabet that was used by native Germanic peoples. In particular, I want to draw your attention to 2 alphabet letters, the first one being Berkano. Now, Berkano is pretty similar to Berserk in the sense that Berserk, it's got a very similar sound there. And then if you actually look at the letter itself, if you were to put the mirror image of this next to each other, it looks very similar to the brand of sacrifice. Now, Berkano means rebirth and sanctuary. Berkano has the energy of the birch grove and is a hidden sanctuary in times of need. Now, when it was time for the eclipse in Berserk, what happened in that moment? What happened in the moment in which Griffith activated his Baylet? It created a hidden sanctuary in plain sight. Now, the birch is the first tree to awaken in springtime, and so Berkano is about cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And this makes a lot of sense because Griffith went through a rebirth as a demon. He gave up his human form for his demon form. And it is also the rune of maternity and represents the ready womb for the childbearing. So all these descriptions seem to coincide pretty well with Griffith's rebirth as Femto. Now, the second letter that I want us to take a look at is Algiz. Now, just by looking at the configuration of the letter itself, if we were to take it and put it over these mirror images of Berkano, it seems to look relatively similar to the brand of sacrifice. Now, when you take the Berkano and you put it side by side like this, mirror images, with the algiz, it looks exactly like the invocation of doom. Now, because the Berkano is symbolized by the birch, and the birch is the first tree to awaken in the spring, it also represents a cycle of death and rebirth. And this is what happened during the eclipse. Griffith died in his physical form so that he could be reborn in the astral plane. Berkano also signifies the ready womb for childbearing. Now, when Griffith sacrificed his comrades to the eclipse, he entered a womb-like enclosure in which he was reborn as a demon king. Now, algiz is the rune of the essential link, or the connection within the patterns of the divine, or the archetypal consciousness. Essentially, it offers a connection with the gods, which makes a lot of sense because when Griffith activated his Bailit, he created a connection with the God Hand, Void, Slan, Ubik, and Conrad. And he even met the supreme ruler, the idea of evil itself. So essentially, you could think of algiz as an activation of a higher self. Now in Berserk, this is a higher demon self, but still a higher self nonetheless. It also represents a perception of the divine plan. And when we consider Berserk and the whole flow of causality, it seems to be alluding to a divine plan that yes, you do have choices in life, but those choices are all known. They're all part of the divine plan, the idea of evil. But anyway, guys, tell me what you think about these musings. Let me know if you saw any other connections between Norse mythology and Berserk, and I'll catch you on the flip side.